Hey guys, can you give me a heads up that you have audio here? That you can hear me? Okay, cool. Great, thanks. Alrighty then, starting in 1 minute. All right, we are live. So, welcome everyone. I think you guys probably know the drill if you're on episode 7 already. As always, we are taking show notes as we go. Yuvi's going to be taking the notes. I'll probably be in the chat a little more than she will. That said, we've noticed in the last few times of doing this, it's really hard to pay attention to the chat and do the actual watching. So, probably won't do a whole lot of that. Anyway, all the notes should be on the bottom of your screen as soon as I switch over to the other desktop. So you'll see like where the links are. I think that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else I have to mention? We'll take a 15-minute intermission at the end of the Vervaeke episode, and then we will do a discussion. So we'll just take a 15-minute break and then do the discussion.
And the discussion will happen in the same live stream. So we will post a link to the Zoom call for those who want to join on the voice discussion. And whoever wants to join can join. That's it.
Also, if someone wants to kind of be the chat interpreter when we do the video chat, that would be really cool. So and by that, I mean like come into the Zoom call, but just be watching the chat and kind of bring up any interesting conversation or any comments that relate to what's being discussed in the video chat, because it's kind of hard for us all to pay attention to the chat and be discussing these concepts.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so here we go. Enjoy.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we began our discussion of Aristotle and how he has contributed significantly to our understanding of meaning and wisdom. And we talked about how Aristotle was centrally concerned with something that he thought Plato didn't give an adequate enough account of, change. But importantly, Aristotle's term for change is properly understood in terms of growth and development. And we talked about how much your sense of growth and development is constitutive of finding your life to be meaningful. We talked about how Aristotle understood that development in terms of making use of Plato's idea of eidos, form, the structural functional organization, and that what's happening in change and in development is that something is being informed. In particular, something like wood is the potential to be a table or a chair, and when it has the correct structural functional organization, then the chair starts to act like table. Sorry, the wood starts to act like a table, or the wood starts to act like a chair. And that is there the idea that when you inform some potential, it gets actualized into a particular thing, and so change is the actualizing of potential via information. And then in order to understand that better, we leapt ahead to look at a current account of growth and development that was directly inspired by Aristotle. We looked at Alicia Uraro's work, and we went through the discussion of what a dynamical system is and how we can use it to understand growth and development in terms of the idea of a virtual engine. We then returned and used that language to better understand Aristotle's idea about wisdom as the cultivation of character, where wisdom is to create a virtual engine, and there's a deep connection between being a virtual engine and the cultivation of virtues. Right? That wisdom is the cultivation of a virtual engine, a character that regulates your self-development, in fact, your self-making, so that you can actualize your potential. You can live up to your potential. And what does living up to that potential means? It means, and we talked about, it means moving through that hierarchy that we talked about last time. The hierarchy of actualization from the mere plant to the animate thing, to the mental thing, to the rational thing. So to be wise, to live up to your potential, is to cultivate a character that most helps you realize your capacity for rational self-reflection, your capacity to appropriate and take charge of your ability to engage in self-actualization, self-realization, and to do so in such a way that fulfills the potential of your humanity, that you most realize, reveal, actualize the characteristics that make us uniquely human. And that foolishness is to have not properly cultivated your character. So even when you have the correct set of beliefs, you believe that you should not do something, you will still fall prey to acrasia because you have not cultivated adequate enough character. Then I challenged you in two ways. I challenged you to try and reanimate and deepen these terms that we use every day to talk about how meaningful our lives are, terms of growth and development and actualizing ourselves and living up to our potential, to deepen those terms by returning and reflecting upon them using Aristotle, but also a Socratic challenge via Aristotle. What are you doing to cultivate your character? How much time are you dedicating to it? Since it is now reasonable, given this argument, that it plays a significant role in how meaningful your life is, how much time have you devoted, how much time do you regularly devote to it? Now, as promised last time, I want to turn to the other side of Aristotle's work and show in a further sense how he contributed to the axial development of these ideas of meaning, wisdom, self-transcendence. And of course, Aristotle is understanding self-transcendence as this living up to your potential, self-realization, ascending through the hierarchy until you are a fully realized, fully rational human being. Now, Aristotle was interested in rationality for exactly this reason. He thought it was the way of defining human beings. Now, his understanding is axial. Rationality is what we've been talking about since the beginning of this series, right? The axial revolution idea of second-order thinking. You can step back and reflect on the ways in which you're self-deceptive and you have a capacity for self-correction and self-transcendence. That's the hallmark of rationality. Please remember that. Right? Because we have tended, and we'll see much later why, we've tended to reduce rationality to the idea of being logical. But that's not the core idea of rationality. The core idea of rationality is your capacity for reflectively realizing, your capacities for self-deception and illusion, and for self-correction. And for Aristotle, that self-correction is a process of also realizing your potential through the cultivation of character. But what is at the heart of rationality? Because if we go back to the Platonic model, Aristotle has told us a bit about one side right? Character. This is, remember Plato talks about how you are aligning the psyche. But Plato also talked about, right, being in contact with reality. How did Aristotle develop this side of the Platonic equation? This is his way of trying to give a deeper analysis of structuring the psyche to reduce self-deception. What did he do to try and develop Plato's idea of being in contact with reality? Because if you remember, we also have this meta drive. We need to be in contact with reality. I put it to you that that is in fact the core feature, or at least the core motivation of rationality. The core motivation of rationality is the desire to come into as deep a contact with reality as possible by those means that are as reliable as possible. So for Aristotle, this brought him into a discussion about what it is to truly know something, to truly know something. And again, he's going to be deeply influenced by Plato, while of course making his own unique changes and challenges to Plato. So we have got a view in which we think, we largely conceive of knowing as being able to give a very accurate description of something. I know what a chair is if I can really describe it very well to you. Now, there's a challenge to that if I were to ask you the following. Who knows better what a chair is? Somebody who could describe a chair very well to you, or somebody who could actually make a chair? And many people would say, well, you know, the person who can describe it doesn't really understand, and they'll probably struggle for words here, and they'll use words taken from Aristotle without realizing they don't get the essence of a chair, right? Because if you can make a chair, then you've grasped something more. And this is again related to this notion. If you can cause a chair to be, if you can cause it to be, then you deeply understand what a chair is. So Aristotle then asks, well, what is it that the chair maker has that the accurate descriptor does not have? And again, it goes back to what we saw before. When I gave you my description of the bird, you know, it has wings and beaks and all this stuff, and I was lacking the eidos. I was lacking the form, the structural functional organization. So Aristotle says what the chair maker has that the good describer doesn't have is the chair maker actually has in their mind the eidos. Think of it like an architect, right, that has a blueprint. Okay. The architect has in their mind the structural functional organization that is actually going to be shared in the building. The architect has the eidos. The chair maker has the eidos in their mind, and they can actualize, they can use that eidos to actualize the potential in the wood to make the chair. So to know something is to possess the same eidos as it. Now, the architect, right, when he has the eidos for the building, he doesn't have a material building in his mind. You couldn't go and house a family of 5 inside his mind, right? When we say that it has the same pattern, we don't mean it's actualizing the same matter as wood and metal in a building, but the same form is there. So for Aristotle, when I know something, and this is the original meaning of this word, right? There's conformity. I share the same form with it. So when I know some object or know something, my mind takes on the same structural functional organization as the thing, such that if I could take that eidos from my mind and actualize it in some potential, I could make an instance of the thing. I could cause it to be. So if you'll remember, shape is not the same thing as form, but we can use shape, as Aristotle does, as an analogy for form. So when I know the cup. I could know it by standing away from it and describing it, right? Trying to describe its shape, and I'm using shape as an analogy for form. Or I can actually conform to the cup. I'm actually taking the same shape. And notice how this enables me to causally interact with the cup in a much more intimate and complex and sophisticated fashion. So when you know something, for Aristotle, your mind is in conformity with it. Now, that's really important, because that means in Aristotle's theory of knowing, there's no distinction, as we typically have, between knowing and being. What do I mean by that? Again, using the analogy. Here's the modern view. I'm over here describing it. It's over there, independent. I'm over here describing it. Here's Aristotle's view. I'm actually changing my structure. This isn't just, I'm not just knowing and having beliefs. I'm being changed. This is a change in my being, not just a change in my knowing. The conformity theory doesn't just change your beliefs, it changes the very structure and functioning of your being. So the conformity theory is a very different way of thinking about how we know things. So Charles Taylor, who I've mentioned before, Herbert Dreyfus, and others, they talk about the conformity theory as a contact epistemology. So to know something is to be in contact with it, is to actually participate in the same form as the thing. We're going to come back to this sense of participatory knowing. Participatory knowing is when I shape myself in order to know the thing, and I know it by conforming to it. This is different from descriptive knowing, where I stand apart and I generate propositions about the thing. So the conformity theory has this very powerful idea of an intimate connection between the mind and reality. And it's based on a very powerful idea. And as I've mentioned, Aristotle is going through a significant revival in our understanding of living things, understanding of mental things. We are increasingly coming to see that this kind of contact knowing, this participatory knowing, is much more central to how cognition works than we previously thought. We're going to come back to that a lot in this series. I just want you to take note of it now. Notice how this, what we need to notice right now is how this theory of knowing, which is also a theory of being, satisfies that desire of being in contact with reality, as opposed to being like separate from it and merely pointing at it with my words or my propositions. All right, so if I'm in conformity with the world, that tells you something very interesting. The structural functional organization, my patterns of intelligibility, remember for Plato, intelligibility, and Aristotle completely inherits this. Like I say, again, read Eric Pearl's book on this, right? How I make sense of things. The pattern of intelligibility is the same pattern by which the thing is organized. So when I'm making sense of things, there's a structural functional organization in my mind that is shared with the structural functional organization of what I'm making sense of things. But does that mean that, everything I think is just true? No, Aristotle is like a genius, right? He's probably, a clear instance of what's been called a universal genius. So we shouldn't dismiss what Aristotle says so easily. I mean, Aristotle literally writes the book on everything. You come, say you're at a party with Aristotle. And you say, well, I'm interested in physics. And then he'll, here, I wrote the book on this. This is called Physics. This is the book that started physics. Oh, well, I'm also interested in philosophy. I'm interested in metaphysics. Here's the book I wrote on metaphysics. Well, I'm interested in how animals move. Here's my book I wrote on how animals move. I'm interested in psychology. Here's my book. Dreams. Here's my book. How to write books. Here's my book. Aristotle is, right, just an astonishing intellect. So what does he mean then? Well, what he means is, right, that after we've done all that axial age, second order thinking, after we've done all this Socratic and Platonic argument and discussion, well, all we've done this rational reflection, once we then get to that eidos, that structural functional organization, we can be confident that what structural functional organization we're finding and how we make sense of things is the same. Or to put it in a slogan, when we've made sense of things, the pattern in our mind is the same as the pattern in the world. So, what are those processes? Aristotle, like everything he does, he tries to explicate a little bit more. So, think about this. Think about how you try and determine if something was real, if it really is the case. So let's say you're interested in Susan, and you're talking to your friend Tom. And Tom and Susan and yourself, you were at a party the previous night. And Tom tells you, oh, Susan, I think Susan really likes you. Now, this is important to you because you really like Susan. You'd really like it if Susan liked you. This would be a good thing. But you don't want to leap into this because your heart has been broken before and you've acted foolishly and impulsively, so you want to make sure. So you say, wait, come on, Tom. I saw you last night. You were really hammered. Like, you were drunk. I don't believe you. And Tom says, no. I heard this way before I was drunk. I heard this at the beginning. I heard Susan say this at the beginning. And then you say, come on, Tom, there were so many people. It was so noisy. How can you be sure? And Tom says, no, this was in the kitchen. Susan was in the kitchen when I heard her say it. It wasn't that noisy there. And then you say, I don't know. And then Tom says, yeah, but Andrew and, Jane also heard Susan say that. And you go, oh, wow, I think Susan likes me. So you do these three tests. You make sure that the relevant organ of cognition, right, your attention, right, your memory, your brain, was functioning normally. Yes, it is. It's functioning normally. Okay, so I was sober. You make sure that the environment isn't creating distorting conditions. Too much noise, right? No, it's an optimal environment. So let's do this. Organ operating optimally, environment optimal or really good, and then I look for, did other people experience it? Intersubjective agreement. So this is what you do, right? You very carefully try to get your mind into an optimal state. You make sure the medium is the best, right? And you do a lot of intersubjective discussion to make sure that you're in agreement with other people. So you do really deep philosophy. You argue and discuss. You enact like the Socratic thing. You really train your mind. You get the appropriate conditions. You do all this. You come to some agreement. And then once you get there, you can have significant confidence that you're in conformity with reality, that the pattern that's in your mind is the pattern that's in the world. Now, I point this out to you, not because I want to say that Aristotle's ultimately right, because we're going to see how that way of doing things was challenged, but I want to point out to you how you still do it now. There's something deeply plausible and practical in what Aristotle's saying. This is how you, on a day-to-day basis, try to make sure that you're in touch with things. So how are things? What is the structural functional pattern of the world when I'm making sense of things? So Aristotle is also, as I said, considered, a foundational figure in science. In fact, for literally millennia, right, he is basically identical to science. Knowing Aristotle is to know science. So he's building upon all the pre-Socratic philosophers before him. But basically, what he says is, okay, how is the world organized? What is the structure of reality? Well, how does it look to us? What can we all agree on? Okay, so we're all stone cold sober. clear day. We can all talk. We can agree. And this is when, now try to get back to Aristotle's time. This is how things seem to all of us. We're at the center. And this is something we're going to come back to, because that's how your perceptual cognitive system seems to operate. You're at the center. Things are moving around us. So he has a geocentric worldview. The Earth is at the center. Well, why do things move? Like, why are things moving? So he has the idea, again, that things move for the same reason you do. Remember Thales talked about that? The magnet is moving, you're moving. Look, when I lift on this and it's pushing against me, that feels no different to me than when a person is pushing on me. It feels like the table is moving itself against me. Again, don't concentrate on whether or not this is true. Concentrate on how much sense it makes. Like when I move the pen away from the Earth, it looks like it moves itself to get back there, which looks exactly like I want to be over there, and I move myself there because I'm separated from where I want to be. So Aristotle's idea is that everything, right, is made up of elements, basic elements like earth, water, air, and fire. Things that have a lot of earth in them, like this marker, want to be where earth naturally is. Earth is at the center. So as you move things away from the earth, things fall back towards it. Water is going to be on the surface, fire moves up, and air is above. So notice when I burn some wood, how much sense this makes of it. Because when I burn the wood, the fire comes up, the water that's evaporated spreads out as condensation, right? And then the ash, the earthen part, falls down. So for Aristotle, the earth is at the center, and this is the thing. Everything is moving by a process of natural motion. Everything has an internal drive, just like you. Everything is trying to get where it belongs. Everything has a natural place. So, and this is very important, everything is moving on purpose. Everything is trying to get where it belongs. So notice how meaningful this view of things is. Everything is moving, just like you. You're doing things to get where you belong, and where you are where you belong, then that's, right, the fulfillment of your goals. That's what makes your life meaningful. So all of these things, everything in this cosmos, remember we talked about that when we talked about Pythagoras, a beautiful order. Everything in this cosmos is moving purposefully, meaningfully. Now it's important that you resist the temptation here to be smug and say, wow, what a silly idea. I mean, thinking the Earth's at the center. Isn't he a Luddite? Right? No, because the idea that the Earth is not at the center, that the idea that the Earth is rotating, was known in the ancient world. It's known by Aristarchus, for example. The problem with this view is that there were great counter-arguments about it. Look, if the Earth is rotating, right, and you think the Earth is rotating, that means if I'm on the Earth and it's rotating and I drop an object, right, as the object is dropping, I'm moving forward with the rotation. I end up here, and the object drop should then end up behind me, because as I let go of it, I'm moving on the Earth that's rotating, and it should fall behind me. So let's do it. Let's run the experiment. Oh, it doesn't fall behind me. See, what you need to realize is that until you also have an idea of something like universal gravitation and other ideas like inertial motion, the idea that the Earth is rotating actually doesn't make good sense of the phenomena. If it's rotating, why am I not feeling a breeze on my face constantly when I face one way rather than the other? So there was all kinds of arguments. So Aristotle has a sense that we can still appreciate. He has a sense of, well, this is how we get in contact with reality, and this is the pattern that is making sense to me. And what I mean by that is, even though you and I are post-Descartes, post-Newton, right, and we know, and we're post, right, Copernicus, we still move around the Earth as if it's at the center, and that, right, the Earth isn't moving, and that objects fall directly down, etc., etc. So given the tremendous plausibility of Aristotle's proposal, we can now put these two sides together. You've got the geocentric, right, world. And by world, I don't just mean the Earth. I mean the cosmos, right? With the Earth at the center and everything moved by natural motion. And then what we have over here is we have the conformity theory of knowing. And I'm going to hyphenate these words because these are not separate for this theory the way they are for us. Knowing, being. It's a way of being and a way of knowing. And what I want you to see is how much they mutually support each other. This is very plausible. That's why I told you that whole story about the person who knows how to make the chair. And once you admit that this is plausible and you use Aristotle's test, it supports this view of things. Because if the conformity theory is right, and I do all of this rational reflection, this is the intelligible pattern that I see. Now, I can look at this and say, this is the intelligible pattern, and it's plausible. It makes sense of so many things. And that view of the world then lends evidence that I am, in fact, in conformity with reality. It provides evidence for the conformity theory. And notice these two things are now mutually supporting each other. That's how you get a worldview, right? You have an account of the world, and you have an account of how you know the world that mutually support each other in very strong bonds of plausibility. Now that sets something out for us. Notice that there is now a deep connection, a deep bonding, as I say, between your understanding of your understanding and your understanding of the world. So, let's try and put this together. This is a view of the world that totally makes sense of your actions. This is a world organized according to, right, purpose. Things are moving on purpose. Things are trying to get where they belong. The structure of the world is very, very similar to the structure of your, right, the meaningful structure of your experience. So this view, basically, if you'll allow me a term that I've crafted with Christopher Mastropietro and Philip Misevic in our book, this, right, basically makes the external world an arena. An arena is a place that's organized such that you know how you can act in it. It makes sense to you. You know where things belong, what actions are appropriate, how to measure and calibrate your performance. And I don't mean just your physical performance, also your intellectual performance. If you are a football, right, player and you go into a football arena, things are organized in such a way that you know intimately how to be involved and how to interact. You can conform, listen to my language, you can conform to that situation very powerfully. Right? This, right, is how you become an agent. To be an agent is, right, to be capable of pursuing your goals. It's to be able to organize your cognition and your behavior so that your actions fit the situation. They fit the environment. So what you have when you have a worldview is you've got this agent and arena coupling. Aristotle is explaining to you how you become an agent, how you know and structure yourself to act accordingly, and then he's telling you how the world is organized, cosmos, so that you can meaningfully interact within it. And these two, there's a process here of co-identification. The identity of this is determined by and determines the identity of this. And the identity of this is determined by and determines this. So the professional football player is a particular kind of agent. They're a football player, and they go into an arena. The arena allows them to be a football player. It affords them. Them being a football player makes sense of why this part of the world is structured the way it is. They co-identify. The identity as an arena and the identity as the agent co-identify. Now, this is important. We need to stop here and be a little bit more, take a little bit more care, because I want to introduce an idea to you, this co-identification, because this is something you're doing all the time, right? You're always assuming an identity. I'm doing it now. I'm assuming the identity of someone giving a talk, and I'm assigning an identity to everything around me. Everything is, has the meaning of how it's facilitating and affording my talk, and even you as the audience have been assigned a particular identity. I'm always assigning an arena and assuming agency, and they are co-defining together. That is an existential mode, to use a term. This process by which you are co-identifying agency and arena so that they fit together and make sense of each other, and you get a coherent and functioning worldview, that's your existential mode. And of course, it matters really greatly to you. We're going to come back to this later. This is an idea from Clifford Geertz. It was an idea that he used to talk about religion in general, and we'll see about that later. But what I want to point out, because a similar idea was also proposed by other people like Buber and by Fromm, and although they also said there were important connections to religion, they didn't identify it just with religion. These existential modes, they are meta-meaning relations. What does that mean? If you do not have the agent-arena relationship, then none of your particular actions have meaning. If I put the tennis player into the football arena, it's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. Things aren't, The tennis player can do all they want, and it doesn't make any sense. The environment is like, what? What's going on? That's absurd. Notice that word. We're going to come back to it. Unless the coupling works, your individual actions and projects of meaning don't work. It's a meta-meaning system because this mode makes possible an entire system of meanings. It means, that the throwing the ball has a meaning for the football player. The catching the ball, the running here, all of these different things take on their meaning because an agent-arena relationship has been set up. You're doing it right now. You have, you have assumed a particular identity, you've assigned an identity to me, and within that existential mode, everything you're doing and I'm doing take on whatever meaning they have. This is very, very important. This idea of your existential mode being a meta-meaning relationship, and that what it does is it's an instance, a particular way of enacting this worldview relationship. Geertz calls this thing we're seeing in Aristotle, the way you get this mutual support, mutual intelligibility, not as a static relation, but as an unfolding process. He calls this worldview attunement. So one of the things that's really important to you, is that your existential mode, the way in which you are creating co-identifications of agent and arena, actually fit into a process of worldview attunement. If you don't have a worldview with worldview attunement, then ultimately you can't get this going. You will be like the tennis player trying to play tennis in the football arena. You will start to experience your existence as absurd. It won't make any sense to you. Now that matters, right? Because one of the ways in which the meaning crisis expresses itself is in people saying that they feel existence is absurd. People often express the opposite of absurdity when they articulate that they have a meta-meaning, existential mode that affords a functioning worldview attunement, which gives them ways in which they are co-creating with the world the agent-arena relationship. So notice what this has done, what Aristotle's done here. It's so powerful. He's given us a way, a language of articulating a connection between what we often don't see a deep connection between our projects of trying to intellectually understand the world and our existential projects of trying to feel like we fit in and belong in a meaningful fashion. That's what's so beautiful about Aristotle. He's given an integrated account of both of these. Now, for many of us today, we don't find that clear, consonant connection. We have a scientific worldview, a view of how things are, how we understand things given our science. But one of the most common complaints of that worldview is it gives us no existential guidance. It doesn't tell us how to make our lives meaningful. I wanted to propose to you a term for talking about this set of things, where you have a worldview that is demonstrating on an ongoing, reliable fashion worldview attunement, and so that it is constantly affording existential modes in which agent-arena relationships are unfolding and blossoming naturally so that the person is not experiencing absurdity, and so the person is constantly experiencing a deep connectedness between their intellectual projects of making sense of the world and their existential projects of finding meaning and belonging and fittedness within it. I'm going to call that a nomological order. Nomological order, it comes from nomos, right? Law. This is what makes the universe law-like, not just in our current sense of scientific law, but in the sense that it's a cosmos for us. It's a cosmos in which there's deep convergence and consonance between our best attempts to scientifically explain the world and our deepest endeavors to existentially dwell within it. When we have that, when we have those two together, we have a nomological order. As the nomological order breaks down, of course, then we start to confront absurdity, and we start to lose a sense of how we fit in and how we belong. So, part of what we can take from, part of how we can understand the axial age heritage, part of the way we can understand what it's telling us about meaning, it's this idea of a nomological order. To have a meaningful life is to have a life that is situated within a nomological order, and attuned worldview that is reliably generating existential modes that are consonant with our best scientific understanding. So I want to pause now in the discussion of the axial age in Greece and in ancient Israel. We will return to ancient Israel after we complete our survey of the axial age, but I'd now like to move to another place that is an important locus of the axial revolution that is having a significant impact on us today. This is something that I mentioned earlier on in this series. We're in the midst of what's been called the mindfulness revolution. One of the ways in which people are responding to the meaning crisis is by an intense interest, both existentially and personally, and scientifically in the phenomena of mindfulness. That somehow mindfulness and the cultivation of mindfulness is a way of retrieving the project of cultivating wisdom and self-transcendence and somehow deepening the meaning that we are finding in our lives. And of course, when I talk about mindfulness and mention things like meditation and contemplation, our thoughts should turn, of course, to India and the axial revolution that was taking there. And the particular form that revolution took that is impacting the West in the meaning crisis, as I mentioned at the beginning of this series, was in the generation of Buddhism and the set of practices around it. Now, this is a very complex topic. We're not going to do it all at once right now. It's going to unfold as we move through the series. But I want to talk about the axial revolution in India. I want to talk about mindfulness, and I want to talk about what it is as a psychotechnology, how it's associated with wisdom and self-transcendence, and I want to begin the discussion of the nature of enlightenment and why enlightenment is largely a project of trying to deal with threats of meaning in one's life. So, just the way, it's only analogous in this way, so don't draw too much, but in the way Socrates was the embodiment of the axial revolution in ancient Greece, I think you can see Siddhartha Gautama as the embodiment of the axial revolution in India. As I mentioned, of course, the axial revolution is being driven there by similar kinds of processes. There's coinage, and there's alphabetic literacy, and other things like this developing. But there's specific psychotechnologies that seem to have come to the fore, and the reasons for that are very complex. I would recommend taking a look at Karen Armstrong's book, The Great Transformation, because she tries to tease out why did psychotechnologies of mindfulness become so prominent in ancient India. And I'm not going to go into that history, but she gives a fairly coherent explanation about sort of historical, cultural factors that generated it. What I want to instead is start talking about Siddhartha as a way of, again, giving us a doorway into the axial revolution in India. So Siddhartha, right, it's all of these figures, right? Socrates, and Siddhartha, and later when we talk about Jesus, I mean, trying to talk about, well, what's the historical, this is a quixotic endeavor, trying to somehow peel away and separate them from their legacy is largely a project that you can only pursue to a certain degree. So I cannot, and I don't think anybody can say with certainty, this is what the historical Siddhartha was doing. And I'm not going to endeavor to try and separate the myth, and I've told you how I use the word myth, from the history. I'm going to let them still remain seamlessly together, because that's precisely how they are making an impact on the West. So the story goes like this. Siddhartha, when Siddhartha was born, his father had all of the sages and wise men come to his birth, and it was prophesied, foretold in sort of an oracle fashion, that the boy had one of two possible futures. One is he would be a great king, or the other was he would enter religious life and be a really important religious figure. The king, being what all kings are, chose the former. He wanted his son, of course, to be a great king, and he decided in order to do this, he would try and remove all of the things that might trigger Siddhartha from pursuing a religious life, a life devoted to the ideals of the axial revolution. So, what do you do if you do not want someone to go through the axial revolution? Well, you try and give them all the benefits of the pre-axial world. You try and give them all the benefits of power and prosperity. So the story goes that the king rigged things so that Siddhartha never saw anything distressing. He was always surrounded by beautiful women, correct amount of food, everything that he wanted. And we can sort of just take that as it is, or we can step back and do something that you should always do with things that have a mythological component. Remember, myths are not irrelevant stories about the past. They're attempts to get you to engage right now with perennial ongoing patterns. So I want to talk about what the palace represents. A good way of getting at this, right, is Marcus Aurelius' famous quote that, and this is how it goes, "It is possible to be happy even in a palace." That tells you how much the axial revolution, right, is, right, antithetical to palace life. Now, a way of getting that is to get at a notion which we're going to come back to later when we talk about Stoics like Marcus Aurelius, drawn from Fromm. And this goes to this idea that I just explained to you, existential mode, that the palace represents a particular existential mode. It's a mythological way of trying to get you to, right, experience, not just think about, but activate in your memory a particular existential mode. All right, so we're talking about the palace because we're talking about Siddhartha living in the palace. What does this represent? Fromm talks about two different existential modes that we all face. Again, perennial patterns. They're organized around two different kinds of needs. They're having needs and being needs. So, of course, this mode is called the having mode. It's an existential mode. It's a way in which you make sense of the world and make sense of yourself in this process of co-identification. This is the being mode. Okay, so having needs are needs that are met by having something. These are needs that are met by categorizing things efficiently, controlling them effectively. So my understanding of a thing is categorical. I put it in the correct category. Here's a cup. It's like all the other cups. It functions like another cup. I can replace it with a cup if this one gets damaged. It really improves my ability to control things. I have this categorical way of representing it, and it's oriented towards me getting very effective, efficient control over things because I need to have water. I need to actually consume it. If I don't, I die. So being able to categorize my world, manipulate it, and control it so I can get water is very important. That means I relate to things in what Buber, who I also mentioned, called an I-it fashion. An it is an identity something has when it belongs to a category. And so what I'm mostly relying on here is my intelligence, which is my ability to control and manipulate things, right, to achieve solving my problems. Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong with the having mode. You need to have water. You need to have food. You need to have oxygen. The being mode is different. The being needs are not met by having something, they're met by becoming something. So, for example, you need to become mature. Or Aristotle might say you need to become virtuous. It's not meant by having something, it's met by becoming, developing. These are developmental needs. Right? According to Fromm, because of that, these are needs that have to do with, right, a particular kind of meaning that you're creating for your existence. And so you're not relating to things categorically, but as Collingwood, for example, say, relating to them expressively. Let me show you what I mean with a concrete example. And we're going to come back to these kinds of examples when we talk again about the connections between love and anagoge. Okay? When you're in love with somebody, right, you are engaged, right, in a being need. You're trying to, if it's love, as opposed to just desire or sex, you're trying to become something, and you're trying to afford them becoming something. You're trying to meet your needs of meaning and, right, maturity, growth and development. That's why we pursue love, right? As opposed, and I'm not a prude. Sometimes you just want to have sex with people. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when you have said, no, what I want here is love, okay? Now notice that, so I'm in love with this amazing woman, Sarah, okay? And I'm in this relationship with her, this relationship of mutual development, mutual realization. In fact, that's a great way of thinking about love. Love is this process, like anagoge, of reciprocal realization. I don't think of Sarah categorically. Remember how I thought of the cup? This is a good cup because it reminds me of all the other cups that I've ever seen. And I know how to replace this if this one's damaged, and I can control and manipulate it. If I was to say to Sarah, you know why I'm with you? Because you remind me of every other woman I've been with, and I could easily replace you if I lose you, and I know how to control and manipulate you. I have not made this relationship better. I've pretty much just destroyed it. Okay? Because I don't interact with Sarah from the having mode. I don't understand her expressively. I'm not trying to control and manipulate. I'm trying to engage in a process of reciprocal realization. We're going to talk a lot about this when we talk about gnosis. So my relationship, I don't assume, right, controller, manipulator of an it thing. I have an I-thou relationship with Sarah. Right? And here, I'm not trying to solve problems. I'm using my reason because I'm not about trying to get rid of my problems. I'm trying to make meaning. To live in the palace is to try and live everything from the having mode. See, it's not that this is good and this is bad. Fromm's point is we get mixed up. We try to satisfy our being needs within the having mode. We suffer from modal confusion. Think about how much our culture is organized around this because it serves a lot of market interests if I can confuse you. If I can get you to try and pursue your being needs within the having mode. You need to be mature. Here's a car you can have. You need to be in love. Here's lots of sex you can have. Notice how we talk about making love but having sex. Modal confusion. Deep existential confusion. And what happens when you're modally confused, right, is, but your need for maturity isn't being met by having the car. Your need for love is not being met by having sex. So you pursue it more. Buy more cars. Purchase more sex. The more, right, the more the corporate world, the market world can get you to try to pursue your being needs from the having mode, the more they can induce modal confusion in you, the more they can sell to you. Being in the palace is a myth in the sense that I'm trying to teach you for modal confusion. It's a myth of trying to live your entire life within the having mode. But here's the thing, because the story continues. Siddhartha leaves the palace. And he leaves the palace in a way that teaches us something about overcoming modal confusion. And in our next time together, we're going to look at how Siddhartha left the palace, and we're going to look at what does mindfulness have to do with that? And what does all of this have to do with wisdom and enlightenment? Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, that was such a good one. Lots to talk about here. We're going to take oh, that's not the right time. Let's see. Let's do 10 minutes. Let's do that. All right, 12 minutes. So yeah, we'll be back in 12 minutes to discuss. If you guys want to jump into the chat room, the video chat, the Zoom call, it would be great if you could do that now so that I can let you into the chat when we're ready, because the stream's actually about 2 or 3 minutes ahead of what you guys are seeing. So yeah, you can do that by going to futurethinkers.org/discuss. And I'll also leave that in the chat as well. So see you guys there. Bye. No, that's not what I meant to do. Say hi, Evie. right, guys, anyone who wants to join the video chat, please go to futurethinkers.org/discuss right now. That's the wrong one. All right, there we go. Hey guys, welcome. All right, make sure everyone who's joining has your stream turned off, the video that you were just watching.
Or at least
so there's no echo. Yeah. All right. Some some parts in that we've been discussing so much lately, so relevant. I was thinking of Heather a bunch actually throughout this, especially with the reality testing section. And then there's reality testing. Hey BG, I don't know what your name is, but maybe you wanna. I'll mute you. There we go. Then there's confusing having needs with being needs, which is also kind of known as state versus process. There's propositional versus participatory knowing. The relationship between agent and arena, creating a coherent, meaningful worldview. Yeah. Anyway, this is good stuff. What were your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, likewise. It's the Agent Arena. I'm glad to know which episode Agent Arena really gets grounded. So I could point Google to that to episode 7. It's become, like you said, so much a part of the basis for having the discussions that Vervaeke inspires, that it's really important to kind of know where that comes from and what he means from that. There likewise are a lot of things that have been, like you said, bubbling up over the past weeks or so that continue to deepen just in the reflection of the way that he does this. One of the things that I, in the comment section while watching the stream, some of the discussion about specifically the way the agent in Arena works and God's view of the way that our relationship to God and everything else is kind of interesting. I've been thinking a lot more about the Matrix movies, and thinking of the desert of the real and the way in which the desert of the real becomes much more. It's essentially what Buddha was confronted with there at the end, right? It's like, oh, okay, we can be in the having mode, and it's like, oh, but if you live only in the having mode, you're going to confront a desert of the real situation where you're going to have the being mode come back in a powerful way. And that, given where we are right now and the whole meaning crisis, why the meaning crisis is occurring at this moment, because we have had such a profound, what I was saying is, the note that I made is, we're essentially living in Plato's cave with 4K resolution. Culture has done a really good job of giving us a high def view of Plato's cave, and it's powerful for bootstrapping us, but it's harder to sort of wake up from.
Oh, that's
a great
so
way
true.
to put it.
I have to write that down.
Plato's cave and 4K resolution.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's so good. Huh.
And then the point about how marketers utilize the confusion between the being mode and the having mode, and the whole capitalist machine is basically based on that. That to sell us the idea that we can meet our need for love and belonging and growth by buying shit.
Yeah.
Well, then it's.
What was it that Stephanie said right before? No wonder we find ourselves needing to have a map to the being territory when the map is not the territory. Someone is always willing to sell you the map.
And willing to sell you the idea that there is a map. Sometimes even withholding the map altogether.
What were your thoughts on that, David? I know you had a comment in response there.
Yeah, and just to the point that the marketers are effective specifically because our hunger for the territory becomes greater, right? As the resolution of the Plato's cave becomes more rich, it actually is like an addiction, right? If I'm feeding the addiction and my actual authentic hunger gets more and more intense, making me more susceptible to more marketers promising me some relief from the pain of being disconnected. It's this weird kind of hyper, intensification of the distance from reality that I start to believe. And the fact that I'll say this week I've been playing a little bit with virtual reality. And I had a moment where somebody called me while I was in virtual reality. Somebody called me and I had to take off the headset and get on the call. And it was this weird moment where it took me like 10 minutes to sort of reground myself back in a body. It was like, okay, hold on a second. There are people here. This is real stuff. There's connections. Wait, where's my body? It was a very strange disorientation that came back in. And so my comment to Stephanie in the stream was, with there's a funny corollary to don't mistake the map for the territory, which is without any maps, there is no territory. And that's when I first had that thought, it's like, wait a minute, that, of course there's territory, but there's not territory that we can touch, right? It's all filtered through some map. And most of the maps that we have are given to it at a very young age. The complexity of the maps that happens over time allows us to interact with the world. But as we start to dissolve those, we just go down to a deeper level map. There really isn't, without any maps at all, it's just non-dual awareness. There's no I, there's not even an I thou anymore. There's just ever-present isness, right? So I'd say the territory is all that is. There is no distinguishment within the territory if there are no maps at all.
Or another way to think of it is like it's psychosis, where nothing makes sense. Because not having any map means that it's just stream of data and color and input and sound and whatever, but none of it actually means anything. Or just, taking too many psychedelics or whatever.
Yeah. It just gets the pure absurdity, as he was saying. Yeah.
And so I think this is where the idea of the agent-arena relationship is really important. That there is our kind of sense of self interacting with our sense of the world. And even though they're constructs, that's what gives it meaning. That there's like something situated within a greater context. And those two things make sense in relationship with each other.
One other.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just one other piece to tie this in. Hey, Mike, here's my Inside Out reference for this week.
Nice. I was getting worried there. 5 minutes.
So the part of the issue with Plato's cave being 4K resolution is it allows us to go for a longer period of time believing that it's static, that the world is some static place. It gives us some homeostasis to the worldview, so that the map can go for a longer period of time without being updated. But the whole point of the movie of Inside Out is the absurdity that happens when the worldview no longer maps to the situation that somebody's in, right? And it has to come collapsing down and then rebooting from there. And we as a culture are at a place right now where we haven't had to go through one of these since the axial age, really, at this mass level of rebooting and saying, hold on, wait a minute, what does all of this mean? And so we're really in a stressful moment right now, figuring out the illusion of static meaning out there somewhere is being challenged very deeply. It never was the case. It's never true. It's always dynamic. But our but in some way the participatory part that makes it dynamic has been on some kind of autopilot. And now it's being woken up and it's like, no, now it actually has to be conscious participation, not just background.
I was thinking when you brought up the VR story, like there's somewhere else we could go with that. This idea of hyper reality, or the 4K resolution on the TV in Plato's Cave. Like, from doing VR that it's almost more real than real. And if you get higher resolution on it and you get that force feedback touch, which we'll have in a few years. I mean, I play video games on just a 2D flat screen in front of me, not VR, and I will have dreams about the game and being in the game with the items and the players and all of that. And it's like, it becomes so hyper real that it just seems more real than reality. And I think that's a big reason it's harder now to step out of the cave than ever before.
It's
I had a
interesting.
question.
No,
Go, Heather.
Okay. I was just going to say all the stuff David was talking about, and then David, the comment you followed it up with was really similar to what I was going to say, but I was thinking on it from an individual level, that the longer one goes trying to satisfy their being needs with having mode, the harder the crash is when the arena comes down around you, because you then have no being capacities to confront what's happened with the arena, and then the complete collapse of meaning. But on a societal level, as you were saying as well, I was thinking of it just on an individual level.
Yeah,
I was also thinking of it on an individual level for whether coming to the realization of being over having, whether that's easier from a space of great having or low having, like whether being in nearly abject poverty and finding happiness there, and then it doesn't matter how much you have, or rather people who gain obscene wealth or power or like celebrity status. And they always say, right, like this is not where happiness lies when they get there, but no one believes them until they get there, right? Like, I need to experience that. I need to be in a relationship. I need to have the job. I need to have the kid. I need to have in order to feel that happiness. And you never know until you get there. Like possibly how we get people to being is by giving them having, to a degree.
I think that's right. That makes me think of Buddha's middle path idea, right? Like if you are in heaven, you can't pursue development. And if you're in hell, you can't pursue development. You have to be somewhere between the two. Satisfying those having needs to a certain basic level then opens up the possibility of addressing the being needs. And it's the balance from there. I think you're absolutely right.
And then on the other hand, experiencing having abundance and experiencing extreme lack can help. Not as a perpetual mode, but as experiences to kind of understand both extremes, I think can help with development. Yeah. Just like, and in Buddha's story, he did that too. He grew up in the palace having everything, and actually, even after he left the palace, he kind of went on a hedonistic path for a while, and he was, with prostitutes and eating food and all this stuff. But then he also went on into an ascetic mode where he was fasting and abstaining from sex and, sitting by himself for hours and all of that. So I think, it seems that exploring all of the extremes is useful.
I think very much so. And I think what David said about VR and what we were taught is there's the possibility there for experience without the repercussions, right? Without like maybe visiting a prostitute, without having the negative side of human trafficking or something, and possibly being able to travel, being able to have that experience of having, right? Living in a castle. You're not actually living in a castle, but is this that fulfilling? I don't know though, whether that would then make you want to seek it like it does in video games, or give you that sense of, okay, I've now had it, and that isn't where happiness lies.
this relates to our earlier conversations about state and process. So if we think of these things as like we need to get there and then we have it and then we have the state and then we're good, that's the wrong way to approach it. But if this is seen as part of a process of growth and development, you know, exploring all the extremes, then it makes a lot more sense.
And then we can say maybe that state has to rest within process somehow. And in our society, process is just something we kind of tag along at the end of state, and we're very hyper focused on state, I think.
Yeah, I think that is the confusion between the having and being in a big way there. I think I lost my train of thought.
It's like state is temporary. It's not permanent. We can have states for moments or days or years or months, but at the end of the day, it changes. And
its role is to support process, maybe, is what I'm trying to say.
It's funny how you can do the same things, but be in the state seeking or process being kind of mode and have a completely different experience of those things. Like the process, and I know a lot of people will say this about money, you have to get in love with the process of making money rather than the end result. Otherwise, you're just going to be chasing, you know, every opportunity and never seeing anything through. And I like that a lot. I like that idea of like being more about the process in everything you do, so that it's the end result is just inevitable because you continue working.
And if you don't get the end result, it's not devastating.
It's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not a big deal because you're more
So
in love with the process.
Does that mean working for the like whatever you're doing it for the sake of the love of doing it, or does it mean actually falling in love with the process, the game of making money, like even if you're not winning at it, that like, you know what I mean, like acquiring more businesses and like, I don't know what context you mean that in.
They sound similar. It sounds like I would say yes to both. I don't know, maybe you can do it.
Because I do think we need to fall in love with what we are here to do.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it makes money or not, because some people's passion and purpose makes money and some people's does not.
Yeah.
And a lot of the love of playing the game of making money is the downfall of the having over the being, and it's hard for me to, at least to tease that apart. I've just given up on the making money and instead making meaning.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm coming at this from my historical mentality of wanting the state, of having the money, and then in realizing that obsession was fucking me up more, and that I could become in love with the process. And I don't mean the process of making money, but the thing that I do that I love, that I'm good at, that also makes money. So it's not really either or. I think there's part of the process is also altering what you do so that you can enjoy it, not just suddenly loving it, making yourself love something that's just, you know, boring.
There's something here that's kind of interesting, but going back to the beginning of the video and thinking about Aristotle again. I remember the first time watching this through, really being kind of profoundly surprised at the profundity of Aristotle's perspective, even though from where we're at, it could be interpreted as naive. Remember when Vervaeke says, "Hey, don't be arrogant and think that it's obvious that the Earth isn't the center of the universe," right? It looks like that, right? And being very precise about the way that it looks is important. But the aspect of what he's saying effectively is that everything has a state that it's trying to get to, right? It's interesting. He actually notes the state part of that equation as that's what fulfillment of purpose is getting to the state that you want to be in. And there's something about what Jubilee said about virtual reality as a way to play with process without the consequences, without dying, right? Without the harm that could be done from failing at that process, which allows us to love the process more, right? It's an interesting, I think we're in an interesting moment where we get to play with falling in love with process in a whole new way. there's something more. It seems like there was something deeper about that. Just that the confusion between state and process parts of this. In this moment right now, we're kind of in this liminal place where both are kind of in flux. And I actually, the point of this that I think is relevant is in places where game B type discussions are happening. There's some wrestling over this. What is game B? Is game B process or state? And it is both, but in a very dynamic agent arena kind of a way that we're not used to engaging with that in, right? So it's interesting to kind of look at the historical perspective of this and how far we've come and what it will take to reboot into a more participatory, deeply collectively participatory way of making sense of our world.
I think the life of Buddha, there's pieces I definitely don't know about, but that he went through that hedonistic period, and then I don't remember the other word you used, UV.
Aesthetic.
UV, aesthetic. And aesthetic.
Not aesthetic, ascetic.
Yeah.
Okay. And that people need to be able to have the sovereignty, the autonomy to be able to go through those states, to be able to, that we can't judge each other necessarily within where we fall in that. People need to go through a hedonistic stage, maybe. They need to go through having addictions or breaking the law, as long as there's like ways to come out of that and ways to minimize risk to themselves and to others. That a lot of what we do at society is like, well, I don't do that anymore, so you better not do that anymore, right? I was doing drugs as a child, as a teenager, but like, you shouldn't be doing them. That's irresponsible. Instead of realizing that it's part of the process, that like there's a group process and an individual process. And when we judge each other on what state's the wrong word in this case, but like what part we're in, it can be detrimental to the process itself.
I think all of what the three of the Jubilee, David, and Mike were all pointing to, the opposite of what I said. You were saying process supporting state, which points back to what David was saying. It's state supports process supports state. And very much that is, like you said, this complex dynamic thing with game B that people completely miss in their focus on one or the other.
I love that we use the term game B, because I think about this whole thing from the perspective of a game designer, and it's like, if you don't have kind of both elements of something you're doing or becoming, or this transitionary thing, and as well that kind of state orientation of like ranking systems or unlocking functionality or unlocking items in a game. Like if you don't have both in a balance of both, where you do this and get this, and then that makes you want to do this to get this, then it's like the whole thing collapses. And they have terms for that. Like it's a lot of games that are poorly designed, the players will call it like a grind. You've got to grind, like go kill pigs in the forest to up your XP so that you can go buy the magic sword or whatever. And it's like, they call that a grind, and it relates so much to life as well. Like certain things we're doing where we're just like battling to get the state, it's a grind. And if the game designers have failed by just not adding that kind of more flow element to the leveling up process, where it's like,
where it's fun and interesting and challenging, and
where you're doing
different.
It both for the end state and for the process.
Mm-hmm.
Like a poor game has too much of one and not the other.
I think also, I don't know the terminology in game, but where you pick your character, so there's, like rogues and ogres, and those probably aren't in the same one, but that type of, that we all have different rules to follow. And again, if you don't even realize you're playing a game, you're going to be judging other people on, you're stealing, right? Well, maybe we should judge people on that in actual society, but like in the game, right? You're like, yeah, that's literally what I picked. I picked that job. That's what I'm here to do. That's what I'm here to learn and go through.
I'm the griefer. Give other players grief by stealing their stuff. Yeah.
I'm the troll. I'm here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and it is interesting that too, because I think this is back to Jubilee's point that the grinding process can be very frustrating. And when you actually get to a state after the grind, it can be kind of celebratory, right? Oh, finally, I'm out of the grind part of it now. And if you see somebody else grinding, it can be very frustrating. It's like, no, all you have to do is just want to get them to that point as well. I think this is kind of that. There is something that's particularly challenging right now with this, as people are developing, of wanting people to be all at the same place. Like the new discovery of process becomes a kind of a new state. Like, this is the right process right now. Everybody should be here.
Yeah.
It's like, no.
Yeah. It's amazing how people can learn something through process and then want to teach it through state. You know, there's something else that was notable here in the game analogy. It's like, I played a lot of those kind of grind games where it takes forever to work your way up, and because I don't have a lot of time to put into that kind of stuff to playing video games, I tend to want to like advance quickly so that I get through the storyline. And so I'll use cheat codes every once in a while, just like to make it easier on myself so I can get through faster. And nothing kills the game faster than enabling cheat codes. It's hilarious every time.
So
Doesn't matter what
boring.
the game is, and if it has like an endless element to it, like procedural graphics or whatever, where it's an endless map or territory. As soon as you start cheating, it sucks. You lose all fun. So there is this necessity of grind, which I think the whole analogy works in life too. It's like if you don't earn what you get in some fashion, everything feels hollow.
I think that goes back to the whether it's falling in love with what you do or falling in love with the process of making money. There's this idea, especially in the self-help spiritual community, that if you're doing what you love, the money will follow. And I call BS on that, because again, some of us have purpose that is money driven, and it will be, and we'll be artists that are seen in our lifetime and make profit off of it. And other people will die poor and starving and their art will be seen later, and other people will never have their art be seen. And if you're in love with the process, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much money or power or prestige you gain. It's like, do you want to paint? Do you want to sculpt? Do you want to create, discover, invent? And then going from that place, which I think means we need to make those two things separate. Give people what they need so they can pursue what they love, and not necessarily tie the two together so that we can get all of the games that people are playing.
Yeah.
The other thing is too, exactly to that point, on the flip side of it, back to sort of the idea of the grind, there's a mental model, I can't remember what it is, but it basically says that depending on how much you suffer for something, like how much you perceive that you've invested in something, is in proportion to how much you then cling to that thing, because you've put in XYZ into it. And so there's this sense of sacrifice, and so needing to have that thing be important and meaningful and kept. And I think that whether that thing is like a role or a way you think of yourself, or some kind of possessions that you've acquired, that the over focus on, or say the lack of focus on process in attaining it, then leads to an obsession with the thing itself, which then feeds further into in the next step, again, not paying attention to process because you're over focused on the thing. Whereas what Jubilee was saying, you'll get the opposite loop, hopefully, where then you're focusing more and more on process, and that in a situation where we can support everyone to a level of basic needs, it doesn't matter whether that process is supporting your material state or not.
That brings up the kind of problem that I mentioned in the game. Like if you find the cheat code and you don't have to grind, the game gets really boring really fast. And I'm a big supporter of like universal basic income, but there is a part of me, and it's the same argument that a lot of detractors are using, that if people don't have to work for a thing that they want, then they won't do anything. And I'm not really convinced by it, but it fits on the video game analogy, right? So I don't know, I'd like to bring that to the group.
I think again, to the game and the cheat code, that a lot of people Like when you first start a game and you get to choose, right? Is it on easy? Is it on hard? Is it on medium? And you know what you chose. You don't know what you chose in life. So you get to the end, you defeat the dragon, and you're like, well, that was easy. Why are you guys all having trouble, right? Well, because you were on easy mode. You put in the cheat codes, you didn't even know it, right? You were born rich, you were born white, you were born in the United States or Canada or Europe. Like you were on the cheat codes, and you're looking at everyone else. I mean, I feel like I was mixed up because I was born into game A, and I've never found joy in game A. I've never found joy from working for money. In fact, if you start giving me money for what I am doing, I lose joy in it. And so I'm like, I've had to learn how to find joy aside from that and outside of that.
I think too, there's a certain level, just to speak to that easy, setting your mode, right? Easy, medium, difficult. There's a certain level of stuff that you can cover with basic income, food, shelter, healthcare, which if you covered that for me, there are still things that I would want and work for, like travel and hobbies and fun things and things to do with my family. But I would know that I was secure enough to survive, and I wouldn't be forced to play the game. My playing of any game to earn money would be voluntary, and then can be infinite because I'm not forced into it by the threat of starvation.
Yeah, actually I think that's a really good point. So the with the game analogy, it would be like if I was starting with a pretty good sword and like pretty good armor that I didn't earn, but then that was it, and then I still had to go and do all the other difficult stuff in the game, but I just had that little bit of an advantage from the start. So yeah, that makes sense, and that also makes sense in the context of the being and the having needs, because the having needs are still provided for with, you know, the having mode. You need water to survive, you need food, you need shelter, like these things are basic, but then the being needs still take work and process, and you know.
And I think on the other, like if you're paying in competition with other people, if they're cheating, whether it's through actually not cheating, like they're just paying for advantages in the game that you don't have access to because you don't have money, or whether they're actually using cheat codes, you start losing joy, right? Like you start, especially if you know that's available, like you're playing a free game and you're like, well, I'm in competition with these people and they can buy for $50 what I've spent, a month getting, which makes sense under the game that someone's trying to get for profit. And yet then you don't have as many people playing it. And so it even hurts the people who are paying for it, because there's a certain amount of, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but there's a lot of that within our current economy. The more we're able to put in UBI and have the outcome from all the people that I think are more on the cooperative side than competitive side. Right now, our society is very geared towards the competitive side. And the more we're able to tap into people who thrive under cooperation, the more we're able to get what they have to offer. And I think they just offer different things. They have different inventions, and cooperation outcompetes competition, because when you cooperate, when you give stuff away for free, when you choose to find what you're passionate about, will do outside of money, the competitors have nothing to give in that space, or very little to give.
This goes back to that idea that not everybody's the same, that kind of optimal balance is going to be different for everybody.
You know what's funny, as like someone who enjoys competition, I realize that it doesn't really matter what the arena is. The arena can be small and inconsequential, like a video game, and I get my competitive fix out of that. And like if my life stuff, groceries, was just taken care of, it would be awesome. Like to not have to compete on that level with other people, I would still find avenues, and I think other people would too. It's just they pick the top of the pyramid of like power and money to compete on.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think back to, just quickly, if you think back to hunter-gatherer days, like we evolved in a certain window anyway, we evolved not competing directly with our community, with the people around us, right? When we lived in those communities of 150 people-ish, those people were not in competition with each other. They were in competition maybe with outside groups, and animals and the ecosystem, but not with each other. They were all supporting each other. And they found within that, like if you look at modern hunter-gatherer tribes, they have all kinds of competitive rituals and games and things that they do within that. But the base things, the important things, are cooperative.
There's something bubbling around, and I don't know if anybody else has read Josh Waitzkin's book, The Art of Learning. He was a chess prodigy as a kid, and then switched to martial arts when he was like 20 years old. But there's something here, Julie, you reminded me of it when you were talking about people, or actually it's kind of in the discussion of cheating and whether or not it's like, does the winning matter? Something that really struck me and the way that he conceptualized his participation was noticing the point at which someone's cheating became a focus for him, was a distraction from actually playing the game. It's like, that doesn't matter. If I put my attention on whether or not somebody's playing the game fairly, I'm actually not paying attention to playing the game the best that I can. And there's something about wanting, the obsession with, oh, everybody else has to play fair. And he's like, that's not in the rules. I mean, it is, but this is kind of this is something like going for an infinite game approach. If I really want to be the best, I don't actually pay attention to the outcome or even the arena and the frame and are the other participants playing according to the rules. I only pay attention to, can I still stay present as fully as I can, as committed as I can to the game as it's playing right now. So what he would find both in chess and in martial arts is he would practice with people who would cheat. He would tell them, hey, I want you to go for the throat, even though in this martial art we're not supposed to go for the throat, go for my throat. And it would mean that he was always able to stay present to the moment, regardless of what happened. And when you read that book, that's one of the things that's fascinating is he actually competed in Taiwan in the world Tai Chi push hands thing. And the Taiwanese cheated extraordinarily well to an extraordinary extent to try to prevent an American from winning. And he still won. It was like, in a way, the game loses because we try to save face for the individual players. And his commitment to what? To the game, to himself, to the process is so absolute, so like ironclad that it actually makes the game better and the players better. But he, Mike, to your point, he actually has gone from competing against opponents in the mind space in chess to competing against opponents in physical space to competing against himself. He's now surfing on a foil surfboard, which is like incredibly difficult. And it's just him against nature, right? It's just him in the wave. He's trying to find how to be the most present in that moment. And so it's like, and he coaches people on how to get into super intense flow states. So there's a lot of this, second episode of Vervaeke talks about flow states. I think a lot of what we're going to be looking at in terms of addressing the meaning crisis is how to get in collective flow states. And it's not by defining an arena where everybody follows the rules and we have dictators looking at, everything is, are you playing fair? No, it's me bringing myself as fully as I can to the arena to develop myself, to develop process.
Yeah, I so agree with that. And there's always a constant battle between game developers releasing a new game and the players trying to break it or find advantages. And that's what we do as a species. There's constantly people trying to test the rules, test the boundaries in order to get an edge on the other players. And there's nothing like, if you're a good developer, you use that, you implement that into your design strategy in the game. You don't fight against it. You let them do that and encourage it so that you can patch those holes. But I agree with you that like, I have some trepidation about the idea that we would want to design some ideal game and put that cap on, especially with so much at stake. It's like you can afford to screw up a video game, and it happens all the time. It never doesn't happen. There's never perfect execution. So it's like there's so many things we can't afford to fuck up in human civilization design.
This
I think to
basically,
honor.
sorry,
Right, go
just
ahead.
one very quick comment. This basically means that we cannot design a utopia. We cannot, because there will always be a percentage of people who will try to break it. And if we get
Which is
up
built-in
our own-
resilience too.
Yeah, exactly. That was my next point. Which, if we get up our own asses and think that we can design a system that can't be broken, that is immutable or, you know, perfect from the start, then we are just being willfully blind to the people who are actually going to break it, and are going to break it much, much worse than if we were paying attention.
Yeah, I think breaking it is part of the game. Breaking it is a very integral part of the game. I mean, to say that if you're going to critique what we build, you're not playing the game. If you're going to break it before it's even there, those are important factors. To fix it before it's ever broken, and to look for the breaks and to try to break it. And the more we're able to do that, I think that the free rider problem in society, and we concentrate on it so much. And I've spent a lot of time sitting and thinking, like, what is an equitable amount of work that someone should have to do, right, in order to have their needs met? And as somebody on disability and someone who can't contribute 40 hours a week to society, and, you know, comparing myself to everybody else, and the conclusion I finally came to was the ethical point where you stop working is the part where it stops bringing you joy. That would not be this in game A, but it's like, that's how it's equitable. If you say everyone has to work 10 hours, my 10 hours isn't your 10 hours. If I stop working when it stops bringing me joy, and that might be 80 hours, that might be 5 hours. Once our needs are met and food's grown and, you know, we've split that evenly, do what you love. And then the free rider problem doesn't matter, because what David said, if you're concentrating on, is someone cheating, that you're not actually enjoying the game, you're not playing the game. If you ignore that and you're like, right, I'm enjoying doing this. I'm doing this 24/7. I'm doing this 5 hours a day. I'm doing this 5 hours a week. It doesn't matter what anyone else is doing, as long as there's enough.
Yeah.
And then game B then is not anything to do with designing a different game. It's about playing the game differently in a way that naturally allows a different game to arise.
Yes.
And there's no designing at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfectly said.
Okay, so there's a part here which I want to poke at us a little bit, because one of the things I've been thinking about is the political arena. Thinking of the political arena as a game, we have a lot of people who are learning how to cheat. One of the things that we say is the way to participate is to vote, and I'm thinking, no, it's not. The way to participate really is to change the structure of the way that representational democracy doesn't work, given the pace in which things are changing, the degree to which, and also the idea that you can do things in secret. I mean, you know, it's very bizarre. When you back up and look at it, originally, the population, the civilians, the citizens are supposed to have privacy, and government's supposed to be transparent. And it's gotten increasingly flipped around, where citizens' lives are completely known to any of the agencies who want to know about us. And what we know about what government's doing is like, no, you can't know that. This is all behind closed doors. It's like, we've completely subverted the system. So there's something about, this is a really interesting notion of something about needing to embrace transparency in this process, including transparency to the extent of being able to find out, you know, some people playing the game is finding out who's cheating, right? That's what some people like doing. For them, that is playing the game. But if we're all trying to do that, then there's a distraction there. So there's something in this that is real world consequences. What were you going to say, Jubilee?
I was going to say that I think that's where being the transparency piece of the breaking it, where if we don't shame people for breaking it, the truth is we know politicians, basically all of them are breaking, like you can't play that game without cheating and lying and stealing, or you're not playing it right. And there's a few that do, but it's hard for them to gain any traction. Whereas if we can openly cheat, you're going to have people who hide it, And you're going to have people who are like, this is fun, let's cheat, but I want to showcase how I do it, right? They're like, I want to break it to find the holes, but I want to show you where the holes are. And as long as we allow that process and allow for transparency, I think it works. Like if someone's stealing from a business, from a person, there's time and time again where they've used the best thieves to help catch the other ones, right? What is the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? Lies, where he like fakes all the stuff and he ends up being hired by the CIA. If you're,
Catch me if you can.
Catch me if you can. Thank you. And that happens time and time again. And if you build it into the system of like, right, that's some people's joy and genius is to break it and or find the ways to break it to showcase. This is how I would break it. This is how I would hack it. This is how I did hack it.
This game I've been playing lately, called Apex Legends, I've just like marveling at it because it's made, or at least it's owned by one of the most hated game companies in the world, EA Games. Everyone hates that company, and they screwed around a lot in the last year with doing like progression-based pay to play. Like you have to pay money to get the items or the powers to be able to progress through the game. And they had such a backlash that their stock dropped several $1 million as a result of people just like taking their game back or not pre-ordering or boycotting it. And so they came out with this game, Apex Legends, which is completely free and has millions and millions of players. And it's just a marvel to me that they would even switch models like that. But now the game developers, all they care about is keeping people playing the game and making it as fun as possible and not have any kind of, like, it's free. It's one of the best games I've ever played, completely free. And they do it with this only cosmetic in-game purchases. And when I think about...
I was going to ask how they make money. That's how they make money? So
millions,
cosmetic in-game.
millions and millions and millions of dollars. It's one of the most profitable game out there. Mm-hmm. And they don't charge for the game. It's crazy. It's just like a mind-blowing transition for that company. And I think about that, like, how do they create all of the incentives there? And how did they, like, experiment, have the willingness to experiment with this? It's a marvel. And everyone else I play with, too, feels the same way. It's like, this is amazing. And I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from what they've done when we're talking about civilizational design. It's like, can we have an even playing field where everyone has access to play the game, and the way you play in a competitive fashion or buy your way into the game is cosmetic only things, where it's like you can't buy your way into an advantage over another player. You can only buy off your sort of like the way you show off. I don't know. I think there's something
that's
there.
Sort of like the universal basic income, right? Is like
it's the free game.
It's the free game, yeah. And then the cosmetic stuff is all the bells and whistles you really want on top, but you don't need them.
If you're
you
really
just
good,
want them, and you'll work for them.
Yeah. That's the other thing, is it promotes talent too and skill. Like that game, and there's a ranking system, and there's no, you can install some software to hack it, but I mean, yeah. Damn it, I proved that wrong.
See?
People do cheat.
Somebody will always break the game.
It's really true.
But does somebody else's cheating matter to the other players?
It
Probably
does.
not.
It's infuriating.
Does it?
Yeah, it's infuriating. It's the worst. Yeah, because everyone cares about their ranking, but you can report them. So
okay.
But
if you only cared about the process, would it matter?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you get killed by that person who's cheating. So they end your process.
Yes. Okay, that is important.
What was the other part to this?
Interesting how it always comes back to this both and thing. Like it's never perfectly on one side or the other.
Well, you know what it is? The cheaters don't have control of the game development console, the controls. They can't mess with that. And the creators of the game have built in reporting functionality. So if you see someone's cheating, and you can watch, once you've been killed, you can watch the other player. So if you see someone's cheating, you can report them, and they'll get banned for life if they're doing that kind of thing. So it's like in our civilizational design, we have the cheaters designing the game to further their own gains, right? But there's always that problem of like, how do you incentivize the game developers? Well, it's like EA is doing a fantastic job. The game developers have like figured it out by offering a free game. I think there's something there in the civilizational design. Like we definitely have to take steps to get the cheaters out of the game development console. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, we have the technology there already to kind of report. As long as things are more transparent, we have everything. All the tech is there, easy.
Can't we just do what EA Games did and create a new game?
Yeah.
And invite people to come play it? Or do we have to fix the one that's already there?
There's probably some middle ground of you need to fix existing things. You need to build some new things. I don't know that.
But if you build the new one that's so awesome that it brings the other people in, you don't need to fix the other ones because they go out of business. They're no longer there. No one wants to be there because the cheating's too rampant, or you're paid to play, or whatever it happens to be. You don't need to fix those. You just need to create a game good enough that people see the intrinsic value in it and want to come and play.
Yeah.
I think that's actually Buckminster Fuller's quote, that you don't try to change the existing system, you create a new system that makes the old system obsolete, is effectively that. And noticing the tension points in the existing game where it's most difficult for people to play fairly. And it's an interesting notion. I like what we're saying here. There's a part of this. So there's a note that I want to make. I was kind of trying to follow the YouTube chat stream a little bit. It's hard.
It's really active today.
Yeah, that's active. It is active.
Hi, chat.
Yeah. But Philip said something about shame, that keeps people in check. And it was a while back, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it's an aspect that I've paid a lot of attention to. I want to just mention it here because it's kind of, I think, a big part of the civilizational design, the redesign of game B, is that this is almost too much to go into, so I'm going to try to do the short version of this. Something like the Dunbar number that limited tribes in the old days, in the hunter-gatherer tribes of 100 to 150 members, changed when we got civilization, when we started getting agriculture, and when we started to be able to have systems of abstraction that allowed us to keep track with numeracy and literacy and other things on a larger scale, allows us to create something like a rule of order. This is where the sense of shame, the sense of belonging to the tribe, means I'm a good rule follower and I don't cheat. And so the sense of staying within those bounds actually kind of acts as a sort of social superglue that allows us to build cities and nations, much larger structure than has previously been the case. But at this point in time where we're at right now, where we have a worldwide internet, and keeping track of it that way, who's cheating and who's not, and who, what even does fair mean anymore? The notion of shame is no longer, it's kind of like that notion of superglue no longer has enough structural integrity to be able to support the size and scale of the civilization. We're now at another scale. I think this is, again, why we're at a meaning crisis moment, is because we're not even aware. You can't even, this is something like macro game physics, right? This is civilizational physics. What is the point at which the structure of the civilization is, the tension between the institutions and individuals within the institutions becomes so great that it can't, it's essentially the shape of the pile of sand, right? It's at a point where it's as steep as it can get and it's going to fall. Shame is kind of a superglue that allowed it to get steeper, but we've reached the new limit of how steep that can get. And so the new game design is somehow figuring out, it's somehow transcending or shape-shifting what shame does, or whatever that thing is. There's a different form of integrity, I think, that comes into play, that the part of this that comes to mind is there's some sense up till now that the need for anonymity and non-transparency was important. And I think that we're at a point now where it's like, no, we actually need to be able to see everything that's happening. If I can see not only this is a really bizarre notion, but I don't even know how to think about this, but if transparency becomes so much a desired feature that we can see what other people are doing, where they're making progress, and even how they're, I think of it in terms of artificial intelligence tracking all of our stuff. If we can see really what Facebook is what Facebook is tracking, what they know about us, how they're selling it, how they're making money on that, how the people who are buying that data are making money on it, and then figure out what we want to do about it. It's a very different model. I mean, the temptation at this point, from the legislator's perspective, is how do we get in and stop Facebook from doing that? It's like, that's just mean. If we think that we can stop it or go back to a time when that wasn't possible, we're just pushing it underground. We have to roll with this, move forward and say, okay, this is the way that is now. How do we embrace it?
I think
it's just such a different change.
I'm reading Brene Brown, who talks about shame a lot, and the idea that shame, for me, shame helped the tribe, it helped the group, because you got kicked out if you were doing the wrong thing, right? And now we're too big to do that. We're also too big for shame to be useful, because there's always a group, you know what I mean? If you do something so shameful, you're kicked out of your group, there's a gang to take you in. There's organized crime. There's somewhere where like that is an asset. And the more as a system, we can stop shaming people for being who they are, including those that want to break the rules, including the breakers, because they have a role to play, and instead allowing them to be who they are and include them as part of the tribe, instead of having them be, yes, you're kicked out, right? You're banned for life. There is no banned for life, I don't think, in my game B, because it breaks it. There is like, everyone needs a place. You don't necessarily get to be with me in my place. You don't get to be necessarily part of my group if we don't really get along and you're trying to break me. But there's a role for everyone. And shame, I think, has kind of broken our society. It's a lot where addiction and isolation and all this stuff comes from. That like most of what we're doing is hiding who we are because we're ashamed of it, even though it's no longer, or it could be life or death, but like we can find new ways of being that honor every
It's almost like this shaming, this obsession with shaming that we have right now in society is a response to what David's noticing about the lack of shame being what's coming unglued and causing this start to shake and dissolve from under us. And so we're desperate for this shame so we're putting it onto people who otherwise aren't feeling it, for whether it's something they should be feeling or not, right? Sometimes maybe it isn't, sometimes maybe it is. But it strikes me that the lack of shame is somehow related to the I-it relationship. And that shame comes out of I thou, because if I pick up a glass that belongs to me and smash it, I don't feel shame because I smashed the glass, right? But if I hurt someone who I have an I thou relationship with, then I feel shame. That's I think where it comes from.
This is where for Brene Brown, or I don't know where she gets it from, guilt is the feeling of having done something wrong. Shame is the idea I am wrong. And so having that be where like we shame each other, right? You said something wrong on social media, you're fired, everyone should hate you, when it's like, okay, why did you say that? What was the underlying reason? Were you in pain? Like, how do we find a space where we're not shaming each other? Because I think the only way we truly get to transparency in society is to not shame each other, right? To say, okay, well, Facebook is broken. But if we owned Facebook and we were able to create something that harnessed our data in a good sense and was transparent, well, I don't want Black Mirror. I don't want, us all rating each other or 1-star, 5-star people. That's shame. Where if instead you can just know yourself more and know other people, you're like, hey, you're late a lot. You don't even have to not be late, but just so you know, this thing runs on time, so you're not going to be invited to this thing, right? That it's more about finding out who you are and where you fit and working with your deficits and giving your talents, as opposed to shaming you for who you aren't capable of being yet, or may never be capable of being.
I have one question for you in relation to this, and it's on the extremes, it's on the edges, like, so, violent people, criminals,
serial killers.
Yeah, people whose intention is to harm and do damage. I don't see that there's a place for them to integrate. And I know that you can make the argument about, well, if we didn't have such damaging society and if they didn't have such damaging family experiences or whatever kind of traumatic experiences that made them the way they are, then maybe we would be able to find places for everybody. But there's also the equivalent, there's also a high degree of effort necessary to prevent that and also to recover someone. And it's as society is demonstrating, it's far more effort than people are deeming it's worth. We'd rather just lock them up. So what do we do? What do you think is the integration?
Well, so it's interesting.
Sorry, go, David.
Yeah, I'll just say that if we really embrace transparency, then it becomes an issue. We know who they are. There's a really interesting dynamic here about noticing. I'm going to cheat a little bit and go to the latest Vervaeke lecture. He brings in Carolyn Dweck and the idea of fixed versus growth mindsets. And we're in a mode where we focus on state. We think if somebody's guilty, they're guilty for life.
Yeah.
And from this perspective, we really don't believe that our prisons are rehabilitative organizations. They're punitive. We lie to ourselves when we think, oh no, this is to make people better.
Yeah.
No, we want people to suffer. We know we want people to suffer. And if we, as we're embracing this and saying, okay, hey, you're engaging in behavior that means you got eyeballs on you all the time. What you're browsing, what you're doing, what you're planning is under watch, because every time we take our eyes off of you, you're using that opportunity to figure out how to hurt somebody. It's an interesting thing, and it may be that we have them be locked up, but in a way that gives them, I am curious because the way that our legal system works right now, it's really letter of the law adherence, where we don't take into consideration what the circumstances of somebody or how much someone could possibly be rehabilitated. It seems easier just to, okay, yeah, you sold marijuana, you're going to go to the same boxed steel walls that the serial killer goes to. You're going to be in that same environment. And it's like, wow, shorter time period, but same basic situation. It's like, this is really messed up. We're not really paying attention to what the consequences of our punitive actions are. The consequences are way more expensive than we think. And so the question is, how does that work out? We don't know. We haven't tried this before. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's a matter of just a binary. You lock them up or you let them free. There's something there, figuring out what is that. How do we allow them to relate within society? Is kind of develops and evolves over time.
There's actually some interesting psychology on people who commit one crime versus people who commit severe crimes and serially. Like serial killers and serial rapists, psychologically, they're in a completely, you could say category, but of course it's a range, but they're just at a completely different kind of way of functioning, where to rehabilitate them is going to be far, far, far more difficult than to rehabilitate somebody who committed a less severe crime and only once or twice. So I think I agree with you that there's a lot of gray area, and we can't just be thinking about it in terms of binary.
I agree with David. Just like a big part of this is just we're right now trying to punish. We're not trying to rehabilitate. There's very little effort in that. So just that's what should be. And
we can't have both. We have to choose. We have to choose whether we want rehabilitation or punishment.
Yeah. And
a lot of what we want is punishment. We would want it at a deep down level. I want you to hurt because you hurt me or you hurt somebody else that I think is valuable, more valuable than you. And that's where I think shame doesn't have a place. Is because a lot of, I think, why people go from committing one crime to multiple crimes and feeling like they can never be rehabilitated is that sense of internal shame of well, now I'm this person, right? I hurt people, and it becomes, I have a belief system that is everyone on this planet is exactly who they are supposed to be. Meaning that we kind of are the reason people are like that as a society. And so we have to own them a little bit. That doesn't mean we get to let them run around hurting one another. But if we took people who committed crimes, whatever that crime is, and asked those people, maybe when they're in it, but when they're out of it, what would have helped you there, right? If you drinking and driving has been illegal for decades. It still happens. It happens way less after the DARE stuff. But why does it happen, right? People aren't concerned about the rest of the population, aren't concerned about their own health when they're driving home, let alone everyone else. If we actually listen, we could come up with real solutions, which are like, oh, you were drunk and you wanted to get you and your car home. I'm sure we can fix that. That isn't making it illegal and isn't putting you away for the rest of your life. It's like an addiction meets willpower meets just logistics, and including violence, right? Like, why is there so much domestic violence? Why did you hit each other? What happened? How do we get to like the emotional intelligence? How do we get families to stay together that isn't ripping their kids out and causing wounds to generations? How do we actually fix the underlying problem? And then, there are sociopaths. We have sociopaths on the planet. They're here for a purpose. I don't know what that is, but if we don't shame them and instead we're like, hey, you're a really amazing human being. What is a lack of shame and empathy here to do? I bet you there would be amazing spaces for them that we need them to be in that we can't see because all we do is pretty much make them murderers and rapists and politicians and CEOs, right?
Well, if you've got a system that has a level of anti-fragility where if, the game testers are attempting to break it at all levels, that's one of those levels you want the psychopath engaged in, or the sociopath, is like, break the system, see how you can break it. That's useful. I mean, you harnessed in a certain way. Obviously, you can't just let them do that with people, but
yeah, that's the problem.
Where there's the transparency, you are being able to see them. And other people, because there's tons and tons of sociopaths, there's a lot that do nothing, right? They're not actually hurting because they're in it for themselves. They're like, I'm gonna go to jail, or what? I don't know. I'm not a sociopath, so I haven't talked to them, right? Because they're not allowed to be open. They're not allowed to be like, you know what? I don't feel empathy. You're already bad if you're that way, right? So they can't engage in society in a way. Like, we're all on so many different spectrums to honor that is our human diversity, and there's a role for everyone to play. The only way we play it is to honor. I can't ever understand somebody else's role, but I know it's here for a reason, and that's a little because it's not based on science or meaning. It's based on like my belief system that everyone is exactly who they're supposed to be, and our human diversity is here for a reason, and it's how we play game B. It's how we get there is by honoring that.
I like to bring up the distinction between capacity and manifestation in this case, because a lot of people have the capacity to do harm, whether they're sociopaths or not. And a lot of people will do harm if they're pressured enough, for example, in self-defense, or in defense of those you love, or in retaliation for somebody that was done to you. But the manifestation is what the person actually ends up doing. So I think that people who have maybe a lack of empathy, or who are prone to dark triad traits that have that capacity, there perhaps could be different ways for them to manifest that in the world that is less harmful. Like what Mike was saying, trying to break systems that are non-human, that are not actually going to suffer from being broken, that are going to be benefiting from being broken, because it means somebody is looking at these breaks and saying, oh, that this is how we fix it. For example, people who are professional hackers, who get hired by companies to purposely try to break their software so that they can use that data to make it better, rather than putting that same energy towards trying to break people.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Heather.
Oh, I was just going to say too, and then when you recognize that if someone does go off track and say someone who has the capacity then manifests the behavior in a very harmful way, that we can recognize that that's happening because of complex causal patterns. And it's not that that person is somehow a bad person and I am a good person. There's a web of interconnected things that link together to have made that person commit those crimes in that way. And the thing, it's funny because there's a thing I often think of when I hear people say, if you could go back in time and kill Hitler, would you, right? Would you kill baby Hitler? So it's a dilemma. Would you kill baby Hitler? And then one day I thought, well, would you go back in time and love baby Hitler and like maybe raise him right and keep him out of World War I? And then World War II doesn't happen. Like maybe, right? There's ways of intervening in these patterns that we're not used to thinking of just because of the nature of gaming.
I had a slightly, and this might be a little controversial, but like the kill baby Hitler thing. And I thought about how, not to make it all about me, but like I wouldn't be here if World War II didn't happen. And I think many of us wouldn't be here if World War II didn't happen. Different people would be here. Would the world be better? I don't know. Maybe there would have been a worse genocide that happened. There's still genocides that happen, definitely, but a worse one that happened, we didn't have that as history, right? Like everything, and that's kind of off topic, but sorry.
Actually, I'm not sure that it is off topic. Here's a thought. I wonder if in some way, the way that we're approaching this right now, there's some way of abstraction that we're distanced from the actual participatory notion of this. And in some ways, we're all micro psychopaths. I think that to the extent that the psychopath isn't our problem, we'll let the state deal with it, is part of the problem. And this is kind of coming up with alternative environments, communities that compete with the primary, where we take responsibility, where it is the citizens' responsibility to deal with the psychopathy that arises within their walls, right? How do we deal with this? And different organizations, different groups, different tribes deal with that differently. We learn from the ability to be able to do that. Right now, we do have this really abstract relationship to the whole that isn't personal, that doesn't feel participatory. And I don't think it's possible to make it participatory at the scale that it is unless we find a way to fractalize it so that it is personal. We have to find a way to make it personal again.
I guess it depends on the person. I mean, I'll speak for us, but we've dealt with quite a number of psychopaths and sociopaths on a very close level in our lives. So for me, it's not an abstract problem. I'm discussing it from very raw personal experience, and ways that it worked and ways that it didn't work. So, yeah.
Well, so here's actually what I mean, though. To the extent that it's personal for you, that psychopath is abstract to anyone who's not dealing with that psychopath, right? So when you say there's a problem, people say, oh, that's your problem, not my problem. But if we say, oh, hang on a second, UV's actually suffering and somebody else is too, how do we as a tribe come together and do this and deal with this and make sure that this person, is it possible to meet this person's needs, the psychopath's needs, without allowing them to do harm? I mean, let's figure out if there's a way to do that. But to the extent that it's only personal if you're actually specifically involved, and otherwise it's not personal at all, is that the extent to which that's an abstraction. So I think you're right. I don't mean to minimize that, but to say that if it's not affecting me directly, then it's not my problem, is something that happens in our culture. And and to some extent it's because I'm already dealing with a lot, right? I don't know how to the game is already more complex than I can play. And so there's something, what I really love overall, back to Vervaeke's whole arc with this series, is collective relevance realization. What actually is important? To an extent, as a survival technique, we make non-relevant anything that doesn't personally benefit me almost immediately. It's why the map makers can sell us all of this stuff, is because, oh, what's relevant for me right now? Faster bandwidth and a nice sports car, right? Like,
what if that was how we solved game B, though? What if you were 100% allowed to be only focused on you, but you're not only focused on you, right? There's so many complex problems that you have to deal with, right? Someone you love gets cancer, cancer's now your problem. Someone you love goes to jail, the criminal justice system's now your problem. And so by you focusing on what is actually your problem, but letting go of all the other stuff that's somebody else's problem, and knowing that there's actually a system to solve that with, because someone else will be dealing with that stuff, because you can focus where you want to deal with it, and we have the tools in place to find people to do that with, I think that you can be selfish and still be looking out for the greater good. In fact, demanding people don't do that breaks game B. because it's denying that piece of our humanity that yeah, you're going to be more concerned about your direct needs. Are your needs met? Do you have water? Do you have food? And those are just things that we can all solve together because they touch all of us.
It's an interesting, I think this is a really interesting point, because there's a fluidity here, right? There's not one answer for everybody that looks the same. And there's not, even within a tribe, there's not an answer that all tribes should look the same. To the extent that I believe, I mean, we know where we're at right now with, oh, somebody will solve the environment. Oh, wait a minute, hold on a second. My consumptive habits are involved with this, and how do I modify my behavior so that I'm not contributing to this problem that's likely going to affect all of us? I mean, it's a very interesting challenge. It is relevant, but it's hard for it's so large that it's hard for it to be collectively relevant in a way that really makes sense. It's easier to push it off.
I think that's where it goes back though to that might not be your problem, right? Recycling might not be your problem. The environment might not be your problem to solve. But if the people who it is their problem to solve are like, you need to recycle. If you're not recycling, you're a horrible person, you're kicked out. That's not going to fix it. We know that's not fixing it. If we can ask you, why aren't you recycling? Why isn't it meeting your need? Because it's not easy. The more we can meet you in your selfishness and say, let's make it easy. Like, we have to design a system for lazy, stupid people because we're all lazy and stupid somewhere. And so if we can honor that and design it for that, instead of designing it for like, you need to be highly intelligent in all areas and be super productive in all areas, you can say, you know what, recycling's not my area, but if you make it easy for me, I absolutely will. And then when I don't, okay, now why aren't I doing it? And now we can fix it because somebody has the brilliant mind to be like, right, well, we can fix that. If you take a plastic and it's not a plastic and it's not made from I can't think of the word where plastic comes from, and it's made from hemp and it's infinitely recyclable, and you take it and you put it in a machine and it comes out again, yep, I would recycle that. If I just got to put it in the machine right in my own house and it came out as new plastic that I get to use, right? Like, we can keep designing for a system to be easier and easier and easier if we don't demand people have to keep rising to the level we're at, that I'm at, in all the areas that I'm fixated on solving. Does that make sense?
I think we're actually saying very similar things. And the way that you're expressing it seems like the other end of the spectrum slightly, and that I don't think that everybody has to be super intelligent and solve all problems. So that's not the claim that I'm making, but it's interesting because I recently watched the Inside Bill's Brain, Bill Gates documentary on Netflix, three-part documentary. And I can't help but see, wow, he's incredibly brilliant. He's using his money to good end. And yet my concern is that he's treating symptoms much more than underlying solutions. He's not, I mean, he's thinking about it, but it still is at the tail end. Where is it causing the most suffering right now? And how do we alleviate that, rather than recycling is not even the issue. It's not an issue of recycling. It's a matter of creating things that don't need to be recycled, right? The things that, and I want, there's another notion here that I'll just mention this real quick. So I just read recently or saw a video about where coal comes from between the 300 and 350 million years ago. When trees first came about, nothing knew how to eat trees. The fiber of trees was undigestible by any life. So it just piled up, and it was like plastic is now. For 50 million years, trees and all the microbes in life are like, I don't know what to do with this. I've never seen it before. This is not edible. And then finally something figured out, a microbe figured out how to digest it. And that's where coal comes from, is that layer of 50 million years of development of trees does something. And so over and over again that happens. And there's something in this that we will find a way to deal with all of this. But in the moment where we're at right now, it looks like there's not a solution. So that's a distraction from where we are. It's an interesting perspective, but it's not so much. What I think is that the solutions that we have in mind right now, recycling and anything else, is a very naive solution. There's a much more integrous, systematic way of integrating with each other and with our environment, with our society, within our own tribes that we're not even thinking about because we think light bulbs and electric cars are going to solve the problem.
No,
so
absolutely. That was kind of what I was trying to get at, was that like
Yeah.
asking people like, why are you doing what you're doing if you're not recycling was the instance. Like if you're shopping at Walmart, why are you shopping at Walmart? Yelling at you that you're shopping at Walmart is never going to solve it. If you're like, because it's cheap and convenient. Okay, if we give you an alternative cheap and convenient source, would you shop there? Of course, right? Like it's meeting people where they're at instead of demanding something from them is what, like demanding that people fix the environment, that everyone gives up electric, that everyone gives up driving, that everybody goes vegan. We feel like life is so hard already and you're asking us to make it harder instead of making it easier for people. And then it's like the byproduct is the environment, right? That we don't need to recycle because stuff doesn't come in. We've redesigned the production system so that everything comes in reusable containers. Everything is, or it's infinitely recyclable, right? Right there. Doesn't need to ship somewhere else to have it happen. That we just keep solving the problem.
I can't see it working in that way without some level of what I see what David's saying here about needing. I just can't help think there isn't a level of coercion in what you're saying, because there's not infinite resources and there's not infinite bandwidth and there's not infinite solutions for the problems and the reasons that people are choosing to do things. Like, I want to eat salmon, but maybe we're overfishing salmon, and it's like, really, I don't feel like my actions are affecting or that consequential in the grand scheme, but like I really like eating that, so I'm going to keep doing it and fuck the environmentalists. Like that's a problem, and there's no salmon alternative. Like, let's just use that as an example. There's no way that conversation is going to result in, and there's many conversations like it where there is no conversation that results in people's behavior changing.
There's fish farms.
Okay, well, I mean, maybe my example is shitty. I'm just saying there can be several examples where there is no alternative and people have to stop something. And there's a conversation, there might not be the result that we're looking for through conversation. There is this element of coercion which our society is like really oriented around, that I think is oriented around because we haven't got other solutions. And that's one thing that I think is part of this whole thing is like, how do we, there are a lot of behaviors that need to change and people don't want to change them, and no conversation is going to make that happen. So then what?
And that's what I mean by like it, because the being having thing, right? If you think salmon's actually yours, like that you love it, it's your favorite food, me telling you not to eat it isn't going to solve it for you, and you're just going to get angry. You're going to find other ways to put that out on society. If you are 1 in 1,000 people that eat salmon, that's not a problem. We all have different things that are our salmon. If we can say, hey, listen, guys, salmon's going out, we can't all be eating it. And so there are people problem solving it, creating fish farms, which aren't a solution currently because they're environmentally horrific. But to look at the truth, why are they horrific? How can we keep making it so that we aren't putting the poop in the ocean, the lice aren't breeding extremely, that we're like actually looking at what's happening and trying to solve it for our individual needs. But I keep asking, what would get you to not eat salmon?
So I think I understood the conflict here, at least from my perspective. I keep responding to you, and maybe David is to a degree, as if you're offering something an alternative instead of saying what's not working, which every time you speak about what's not working, I'm completely agreeing with you. And then I'm jumping onto some idea of what you might be proposing, but I don't know what that is. That's the thing. It's like, we don't have a lot of propositions here of what we can do. There's just like, we all need to stop doing this, and this isn't working. And it's like,
right. So I'm talking about creating the tools to actually be able to do that, though, which I didn't actually say in this conversation, but that's what I'm trying to do in the world, is like, what would get you to not dealing with you at that individual level is going to be much more effective than just yelling at you to stop eating salmon or saying eating salmon's now illegal. If we can ask, right, just like the drinking and driving problem, why are you drinking and driving? Can we solve it, right? Yeah. Why are you eating the salmon? If we can't make it illegal, because we can't, I can't make laws, but I could work with you on the salmon. I could have a conversation about like what would you eat that's not salmon?
I so
How
regret
could
the
we create a
salmon
fish
example
farm that isn't a problem? But like
Stupid
meaning that
example.
there's like, if I can deal with you on like, there's ridiculous things people do, like those people in the southern United States who like roll coal, right? They're like, global warming's not a thing, and they just like churn their cars over with like black smoke coming out.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. But like it's because they're dealing with shame. They're dealing with I don't know what they're doing, but like yelling at them is never going to get it solved. Whereas looking at the actual issue and saying like, why are you doing that? Like, what would help you not do that? And then like meeting them where they are instead of demanding that they're where we are, which is like, of course climate change is real. You're killing all of us. Like it's I want them to not roll coal. I want that to be something that happens. I maybe even want it to be illegal, but that's not actually going to be as effective as like having a conversation and keep asking, well, why? What would help you? What would, like what would get you to actually not do that? And maybe we can never meet that. But like it opens up many more possibilities to have the tools to keep asking.
Yeah.
What would help?
I agree with you. It's probably a better way to do it. I'm not seeing to the end of it. That's all.
I know you're gonna.
I'm thinking of extreme examples. Yeah. Child molesters, for example. Like Louis C.K. had that joke, and it's ironic that he got later, exposed for being guilty of not quite child molesting, but still, he had that whole joke that for some people that's just their favorite thing, and no matter what you offer them, no matter what alternative, no matter what laws you create, that's just their favorite thing, and if they can find a way to do that, they'll do it. So how do you negotiate that? How do you create a system where they can be accepted and be functionally part of a society with that as their drive?
I think you ask people who are pedophiles, who have an attraction to children, because I don't, but like if you ask them, how can you get those needs met without ever hurting a child? Without it needing to make me feel good, right? Children can't be hurt. And your sexuality means you're attracted to children. Those people exist. I can't stop them from existing. And children need to not be hurt. There are solutions that I might not like, but they exist. And hurting a child is not an option, but neither is right now in society, where you go to your therapist and say, I'm attracted to a child, and they just cut you off. They're just like, no, we discussed this, and you're no longer my client. That's not solving it. There's rampant child sex abuse and child sex trafficking, right? Like, we're not solving it. And so feeling gross about it isn't solving it. Yelling, like putting them in prison is solving it a bit. Like I'm not in any way saying don't put them in prison. If you're acting on something that is hurting other human beings, we have to make that stop, right? Like in that extreme circumstance. But there have to be other solutions which involve asking the people who are involved in it what would help, right? Like, how do we make you not feel shame about who you are without acting on the thing, without, I don't remember the word you used earlier, UV, of the thing you do, right? Like you have the capacity that you're attracted to children doesn't mean you're necessarily going to hurt them. But I don't remember what the word you used was, sorry.
So I want to just note that there's a point here which is like subtle, in that where I back up and say, hang on a second, is in the thought that I can ask them and they can tell me. I don't think that that's possible in the same way that I say, oh, you're addicted to heroin, we're not going to give you heroin. Tell me how you can be satisfied without heroin. It's like I actually don't know that. I don't have the capacity to be able to use my propositional layer of understanding to get to the participatory knowing of what this need is immediately. But there are ways that we can interact that can explore that together to find it. So there's something in a practice of discovering what is it that we're doing that we will become better able to know what's there. And for some people, it may never get there. For some people, it will. But the notion that there's some fixedness and some knowledge that we can ask is like, I don't think that that's my experience is that that's not true. It's true. It's not true for me.
Yeah. And so I don't mean to monopolize conversation, but I don't mean that like every person in that position would have a solution, but to ask the community, it seems like wrong, but like to ask people who've been in that position, right? You've been attracted to children your whole life and you haven't acted on it. Why didn't you? Right? You have, and you did. What would have stopped you? Right? To be able to actually have that conversation instead of just blanketing over with shame and disgust, like those people don't exist and they can't exist and they just need to be terminated, isn't like they exist and they're hurting children. So my priority is that they don't hurt children. What actually gets us there?
Right. We're agreeing. Yeah, we're agreeing there.
Sorry, I always sound passionately like I'm yelling at people and arguing. I'm not. Like I'm not. That's just like.
Well, the thing that is apparent to me that you are passionate about is shaming people doesn't help.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yelling at people doesn't help, and we're all in agreement there.
Yet I yell it.
Yeah.
Stop yelling at me. I know.
I feel like there's something really interesting in all of this that relates to the metaphor of cells in a body, and that each cell is doing its own thing and completely focused on doing that thing well, and unconcerned that the cells in the end of your finger aren't so concerned with the cells in the end of your toe and what those cells are doing. But each cell is also continually receiving and sending out messages from the cells around it and from maybe central hub clusters of cells in the heart and the brain and the gut, and interpreting those messages. And when one cell is doing something unsustainable, the messages that it sends out are in fact picked up by other cells around it. And if those cells are tuned into that, they will pick up on what David's talking about, this process, and move into process with other cells in a way that brings them back into alignment with the whole.
Or kills them.
Or
kills them. Fair enough. But not based on some kind of not based on some kind of policy or state or rules or coercion. If that is what happens
on the street. Sorry, Heather.
There you go. Yeah.
If you're an agent, you're a free agent out there.
You got it. All right, my metaphor breaks down here, but
sorry.
You get the idea.
I'm trolling.
Well, I love that. I love that perspective, and it is one of the things that I've been looking at. It's one of the reasons I have a guttural feel, a gut knowing that our political system is broken, because I know that we think of it in terms of we can delegate to some chief neuron. If I think of people as neurons in a global brain, that we can delegate to them and they'll know what to do, and I can stop worrying about it now. Like, nope, that's not the way that biology works. That's not the way that intelligence works. This is where we get into the homuncular fallacy, that there's a little man in there somewhere, and if we give a responsibility to them, then I can stop worrying about it for me, and I can go eat my Snickers bars.
Yeah.
I guess that's also like where the system, to me, like with the transparency, it's not that you're giving up power to the group in authority. You're giving up the need to be everything for everything, right? Like you're like, okay, well, this isn't my problem, but I can also see transparently that there are people working on it, right? I'm not just like, whatever, someone else will solve climate change. It's like there's people who have been empowered who are working on it because it's their genius and their passion, and they're able to ask things of us. And you know what I mean? Like, hey, I need this data from you. I need this. And to be able to create a system that actually feeds back into, like, you're not just passing that off. If that makes sense.
Yeah, just real quick here, this is really key, because the distinction for transparency isn't that everybody sees everything at all times. That's the problem with combinatorial explosion, right? Exponential overwhelm. And so the real chief issue with relevance realization is there's always too much to pay attention to. How do I set my noise signal meter filter so that it's actually doing something useful? And each person has to make that conscious decision. There has to be agency, and agency in dance with arena to how to set that. And that's something that right now we don't train, right? That's one of the things that's really apparent in watching the Vervaeke series, is that we're missing that piece. We believe the arena is set and the agent is set. And if it's a good relationship, then awesome. If it's not, then fix it. It's like, no, wait a minute. Both of those are dynamic and ever flowing, and we're just not seeing it that way. We're not participating in that way. And our education system doesn't work that way. Our political system doesn't work. Our economic system doesn't work that way. None of that works that way. So how do we notice it and re-engage that way? So yeah.
And part of it is setting up the tools to have like the dashboard where you can actually see it visually easily, where it's not just all the information flying at you. It's like, okay, we can see the temperatures, what, climate change is, and here's that graph. The information's there, and so I can get it visible to me. And I know that other people are working on it because I can see they are, and I somewhat give that they know what they're doing because I could get into it if I wanted to. I could go as deep down if I wanted to, but they got that.
Right, which is funny because the people that I've talked to who've been thinking about designing systems like this, imagine something like the citizen dashboard would look basically the same. You could tweak it, but it would look basically the same. It's like, nope, that's actually not true, because I don't care about temperature, right? What I care about are some other attributes. So it's like, wow, this is a really interesting design problem of how to design an interface that is infinitely customizable to my specific things and dynamic based on my current needs. And this actually is part of the issue of the thought of how do we get to the point of being able to ask people, what is it that you actually need? Often where we get into problems, I think, is that we start to go into strategic mode without actually knowing what the need is. I'll just use this as a quick example. A friend of mine who smokes said, I really need a cigarette. And it just stunned me. It's like, I don't know what that need feels like. I've never smoked a cigarette, so I don't have that addiction. It's like, I can't imagine that need. And it's hard to envision that you have a need that is not ignorable, right? It has to be answered. And I don't even have, there's no signal, noise, anything for that on that realm for me. Which is kind of the awareness that we each, it's a specific example, we're each in our own world monitoring different needs, but without being aware of the full stack of how we participate and identify what the needs are before we start to engage in the strategy for how to deal with it. Really recognizing the parts is kind of an essential part of solving this. And again, how do we educate and raise children so that they have the capacity to have fluency in that and at that level?
There's so many points I want to keep talking about, and I would love to extend this conversation maybe into next week, or maybe we can find another time, but we are at a time right now. So thank you guys. I love the energy. I love watching you guys. And I find myself nodding the whole time, both of your points. That was a lot of fun.
Really appreciate it. It was a really great conversation. Sorry if I got I came off overheated because I was like, this is fun. More so that sometimes it comes off as angry. You're like, I wasn't disagreeing either. I felt, but
yeah, it felt like a debate that we both agreed on. I was like, what's going on here? I was like,
I feel like that happens to me a lot, which is why I'm working on the idea cafe of like structured rules, so it doesn't come off that way. I'm like, here's my.
Yeah. Yeah, violent agreement is a thing.
Violent agreement.
Yeah. That's funny. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you, chat, for participating so much. I want to go rewatch this whole thing with
the
same chat now.
All
right, guys.
Okay.
Cheers.
Take care. See y'all next week. All right.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.